Today's webinar is entitled Treasures of the RIT's Cary Collection. Our presenter today is Steven Galbraith, curator of the Melbert B. Cary Jr. Graphic Arts Collection here at RIT. Steven has a PhD in English Literature from Ohio State University and an MLS from the University of Buffalo. Prior to coming to RIT, he was the Andrew W. Mellon Curator of Books at the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., the curator of early modern books and manuscripts at The Ohio State University, and a reference librarian at the University of Maine. He is the author of works on early English printing, book conservation and digitization, and English Renaissance literature. Today, Steven will take you on a virtual tour of the collection of artifacts that make up the Cary Collection. Steve, take it away.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to my presentation titled Treasures of RIT's Cary Graphic Arts Collection, a virtual tour. I'd like to thank Cindy Soberai for this opportunity to participate in this RIT webinar event, and I'd like to thank all of you who are tuning in to listen. As my presentation title suggests, I hope to introduce you all to the Cary Graphic Arts Collection and its holdings. We'll take a virtual tour together. Along the way, I'll show you some of the amazing treasures that we preserve in our library. Well, my screen appears to be frozen, but I'll just continue on. The most important takeaway from this presentation is that the library and its contents are here at RIT for use by students, staff, faculty, and alumni, as well as our communities beyond. We are open Monday through Friday, 9 to 12 and 1 to 5, and also by appointment. Walk-ins are fine, but we actually recommend that you make appointments. That makes it easier for us to prepare for your visit. Our contact information is up on this slide, and it'll be up for another minute or so. I'll also have this information for you at the end of my presentation. Should you ever have any questions about the Cary Collection, please email me at the address you see in red. RIT's Cary Graphic Arts Collection is one of the world's premier special collection libraries on graphic communication history and practices. The artifacts housed in our library range from cuneiform clay tablets from 2300 BCE to modern computer tablets and e-readers. And here on your screen you can see on the left is a Sumerian clay tablet from about 2300 BCE, and on your right, one of the early Nooks. We collect those. Someday you have to imagine those will be historical artifacts. From medieval manuscript leaves, like this example, from a 13th century English psalter. And here, let me show you a nice detail of that face that sits at the top of the page with his kind of acorn hat. All the way to the 20th century and the calligraphic master Edward Johnston, and here's an example of his calligraphy. Decades ago, to the calligraphy of type designer Hermann Zoff, who designed fonts such as Palatino and Optima, and taught at RIT in the summers in the late 1970s. The Cary Collection actually preserves half of Zoff's archive. From the earliest printed books, and here is a page from our earliest complete book, our complete printed book, a Bible commentary called Mammotractus Super Bibliam, and that's Latin, printed in 1470. And I'll have a nice detail here of what we call a printer's device, and that's the kind of the logo of the printer here. His name is Chauffeur. All the way to a modern artist's book, and in this case the work of the Persian poet Rumi engraved into leaves of glass, published by book artist Vincent Fitzgerald. All told, our library houses about 45,000 books, along with related archives. We also house the Cary Graphic Design Archive, which I'll tell you about in greater detail in a moment. Before we take our tour, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Cary Collection's history. Our library's namesake, Melbert B. Cary Jr., was director of Continental Type Founders Association, an agency that imported metal printing type from Europe to America for sale to printers. Cary also ran his own private printing press called the Press of the Woolly Whale, and was a collector of books on the history of printing. His wife, Mary Flagler Cary was also a keen collector. After her death in 1967, the Mary Flagler Cary Charitable Trust was established. 2 years later, in 1969, the Trust established the Cary Graphic Arts Collection at RIT in honor of Melbert Cary, with a donation of his library of about 2,300 books and an endowment. Growing Cary's 2,300 books into a library of 45,000 books has taken 45 years of collection development through both purchases and donations. It all started in 1969 when the Cary Collection was housed in the School of Printing. Perhaps some of you will remember visiting the library when it was on the first floor of James E. Booth Hall. You might have had a class with Alexander Lawson or Herb Johnson, or maybe more recently with my predecessor, David Pankow. In 1991, the Cary Collection moved to the second floor of the Wallace Center, the Wallace Library, so we are now a part of RIT Libraries. Here is the exterior of the Cary, and it's where I want to begin our virtual tour of the collection, a tour that I hope you'll all someday take in person. The space outside our library is where we hold our exhibitions. We host at least 2 a year, corresponding to the fall and spring semesters. We draw from our rich holdings, choosing topics that reflect the library's commitment to the history of graphic communication. Recent exhibitions have covered subjects as diverse as the 400th anniversary of the printing of the King James Bible, comic books, and travel posters. In addition, we also prepare mini exhibitions for courses that use Cary materials in their assignments. Walking through the door, we enter the main reading room. This is where most of the action takes place. The room itself houses a large portion of our book collection in the glass cabinets that you can see around the perimeter of the room. This room is where we serve students and researchers. Books and other materials they request are brought out to these tables for them to consult. And what sort of things do they look at? I've mentioned already that we hold about 45,000 volumes related to graphic communication history and practices. That's quite a large scope, within which we have substantial teaching and research collections related to the following areas: the development of the alphabet and writing systems, early book formats and manuscripts, calligraphy, the development of typefaces and their manufacturing technologies, papermaking, the history of printing and illustration processes, bookbinding, and artist books. Let's focus briefly on the history of printing. It's where the Cary Collection really has its roots. As I've mentioned, our benefactor, Melbert B. Cary Jr., ran a type importing agency and was a printer himself. Our library also began in RIT's School of Printing, now called the School of Media Sciences. It is still probably the department with which we work the most. Our collection documents the history of printing, beginning with examples of the earliest printing with metal movable type. For example, we have in our collection 2 pieces of Korean movable type from the early 15th century, metal type which predates Gutenberg by decades. This really helps demonstrate to our students that printing with movable type predated Gutenberg. Speaking of Gutenberg, we are fortunate to have 2 leaves from the Gutenberg Bible in our collection. Printed in Mainz, Germany in about 1455, we used these leaves to discuss the origins of printing in Europe and mass printing across the world. We talk about how Gutenberg made movable type and how books in the first decades of printing were really hybrid documents that still contained manuscript elements. For example, in this detail, you can see that the blue initial Q and the red initial M beneath to the right were supplied in manuscript, that is, by hand, and not printed. And here, actually, Gutenberg is following medieval scribes. When manuscripts were made, the scribe would write out everything in black, and an artist afterwards would then illuminate or add gold or red and blue inks to the page. When Gutenberg invents printing in Europe, he follows that same workflow. The black is what you see printed, and the colorful elements are added later by hand. Building from Gutenberg, our collection contains books demonstrating the history of printing. Like our copy of the works of the Roman poet Horace, printed in 1501 by the famous Venetian printer Aldus Manutius. Aldus's edition of Horace is a treasure of the Cary Collection, demonstrating two important milestones in the history of printing. In 1501, Aldus took the innovative step of printing pocket-sized editions of famous authors. His first was an edition of Virgil. The second was this book, an edition of Horace. The type he used was the very first italic type ever produced. So this book contains the second use of the first italic printing type. And as I mentioned before, early books were a hybrid of print and manuscript elements. So if you look at that initial capital M, the printer, Aldus, has left space there for an artist to illuminate it afterwards. But if you look carefully within the middle of that M, you'll see a tiny little printed M, a guide letter telling the artist what letter was supposed to be drawn in there. Here's a picture of me holding the book so you can get a sense of the book's size. Again, it's a pocket size. Maybe they had slightly different size pockets than we did back in 1501. One of our greatest research strengths in the field of printing is our collection of type specimens. Type specimens are printed broadsides, similar to posters, or books that advertise different typefaces that were available to printers for purchase to use in their shops. Our collection dates back to the early 18th century. For example, here are pages from a rare specimen book printed for William Caslon. Caslon's typefaces were extremely popular in the 18th century. The Declaration of Independence, for example, was set in Caslon. Caslon typefaces are still used today, though in digital form. Here are leaves from a more colorful type specimen. It's a specimen of chromatic wood type, that is, type used to print in two colors or more. And it's from 1874, printed by the William H. Page Company. Because specimens were used as sales catalogs, they are ephemeral works. Only about 11 copies of this chromatic wood type specimen survive. My colleague, curator Amelia Fontenelle, is in the process of preparing a facsimile edition of this book. Artist books often make appearances in the Cary Collection's reading room. Artist books are hard to define, but in essence, they are pieces of art with some relationship to the book form, but the possibilities are really endless. One of my favorites, and I'm cheating here a little bit because this book is actually housed in the RIT archives on the third floor of the library, but one of my favorites is Karen Hamner's Destination Moon. It's an artist book that combines archival documents from the Apollo space program with the text of John F. Kennedy's Man on the Moon by the End of the Decade speech, along with lyrics to the song Destination Moon. It's a really fun book. Its pages not only turn like a traditional book, but when my colleague teaches with this book, she usually has the students count down to liftoff because the rocket actually takes off. There it goes. From the main reading room, we travel to the Dudley A. Weiss reading room. We also call this the Middleton Room because it houses the reference library of English bookbinder Bernard C. Middleton. Dudley Weiss was one of the benefactors who made our acquisition of the Middleton Collection possible. The Middleton Collection of books on bookbinding came to the Cary Collection in 1983 and has been growing ever since. In addition to books on bookbinding, the Middleton Collection also contains exemplars of fine and historic bindings. For example, here is an edition of the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, published in 1897 that features a Volucent binding by Cedric Chivers from Bath, England. In preparing a Volucent binding, A painting on paper is set beneath a translucent layer of vellum, or calfskin, so that the image can be seen through the skin. Any tooling, like the application of gold used in this design, is applied to the outside of the binding, so onto the skin. The painting is beneath the skin, and the tooling is on top of the skin. This creates a beautiful kind of soft focus effect, while also protecting the painting from being scratched or scrubbed when it's shelved. Here are the front and back covers to a more modern and adventurous bookbinding, designed by Michael Wilcox for an edition of a book titled Divina Proportio Typographica, or The Divine Proportions of Printing. The geometric designs relate to the golden ratios of book design, and therefore the figure appears to be holding a book, or a book's page. On the back cover, what you see on the right, the figure raises 9 golden rectangles, each representing printing type. The artist chose 9 as if to spell Gutenberg. Showing only 2 examples from the Middleton collection really doesn't do it justice. Indeed, it is one of the most complete collections of its kind in the world. But we leave the Middleton room and move to the Arthur M. Lowenthal Memorial Press Room. When it comes to documenting the history of the book and the history of printing, what distinguishes the Cary Collection from other institutions is that not only do we collect books, but we also collect the technology used to produce them. Our press room houses a collection of over a dozen historic printing presses, dating from 1820 to 1960. In this image, you can see our Columbian printing press from 1874. It's the one on the left, topped with a golden eagle. That eagle is not only decorative, it also serves as a counterweight, helping to adjust the impression of the printing. The press that's on the right-hand side, kind of in the lower corner there, it's a little difficult to see, is an early 19th century Albion printing press, once owned by the famous printer and type designer Frederick Goudy. The Cary Collection has a strong Goudy collection, including some of his original printing types. Our oldest printing press is this small Albion from the 1820s. What's fun about this press is that it rests on a pallet, thus allowing us to move it around the building. Here is a picture of the press being used during the 2012 Imagine RIT Festival. We will use it again at this year's festival. If you plan on coming, be sure to stop by the first floor of the Wallace Library and print your own RIT poster. As a matter of fact, some students of ours were studying that poster just this morning. Not only do we use this Albion, all of the presses in our collection are operable and are maintained to be working presses. Here is a picture of our friend Rich Kegler, who runs P22 Type Foundry in Buffalo, New York, and he's working on one of our Vandercook presses from the 1960s, one of our most modern printing presses. This past January, we welcomed our newest addition to our press room, and it's one that we're very excited about. In fact, it's one of the Cary's true treasures. Last fall, Christie's in New York announced that it would be auctioning the printing press that was used by the father of the arts and crafts movement in England, William Morris, and he used it for his Kelmscott press. This press is most famous for having printed Morris's edition of the works of Geoffrey Chaucer in 1896, a book so elegant that it is considered one of the finest books ever printed. You can see the beauty of the book in this opening to the Canterbury Tales. Morris's printing press had been on the Cary Collection's radar for some time, not only because of its history with Morris, but for the history that followed. In 1924, the printing press left England and traveled to Marlborough-on-Hudson in New York, just north of New York City, to the print shop of Frederick Goudy, who we mentioned earlier. Here's a picture of Goudy working on that press. What really made us interested in the Kelmscott printing press is that after being owned by Gowdy, it traveled to Eden, New York, outside of Buffalo, where it was owned by a press called the Aries Press. But afterwards, it returned to New York City, where it was owned by our namesake, Melbert Cary. With the generous support of an alumnus from the School of Printing, we had the means of bidding on the press at auction on December 6th, and were successful. Moving the press from New York to Rochester and then into our press room is a story for another day. But it's here and in the process of being refurbished. This coming fall, our exhibition will be on the 45th anniversary of the Cary Collection. Part of that celebration will be a welcome party for this press. You are all invited to come. It'll probably be in early to mid-October. Of course, you can't have a collection of printing presses without having printing type. Complementing our presses, therefore, are over 1,500 fonts of metal and wood type. Printing type are bits of metal or wood with letters or other characters in relief at the tip, as shown in this image. The Cary Collection houses both working type, so the stuff we use when we're using our presses, and historical type that we preserve for future generations to be studied more as historical artifacts. Recently, we needed to clean about 120 fonts of wood type that had been donated to our library. So my colleague, Amelia Fontenelle, initiated the Adopt-A-Font program, where students, faculty, and staff volunteer to clean a font of wood type. And here we see 4 students in the back of the Cary slowly getting the dust and dirt off of the type you see in the green box at the edge of the table. They also describe and catalog it along along with our archival practices. Then they go to our press room and they set the type, and here a student is putting the alphabet in a galley, preparing it to print. And then they print a specimen. Well, they print a few specimens, really. They'll print a couple for themselves, and then one for us to use in our archives. We are happy to say that we have had such tremendous support that we are nearly done cleaning all 120 fonts. That said, we do need help, and alumni are more than welcome to participate. Indeed, we recently acquired fonts of Hebrew wood type, used for Yiddish newspapers at the turn of the last century. These fonts are of significant historic value, so the Adopt-A-Font program continues. The last stop on our tour is to an area adjacent to the Cary Collection, where we house the Graphic Design Archive, or GDA for short. The GDA contains the archive of 42 significant mid-century modern graphic designers. The first collections in the GDA came to RIT in 1984 through the efforts of RIT professor Roger Remington and found a home in the RIT archives. Decades later, the growing GDA required more space, and so it was transferred into the care of the Cary Graphic Arts Collection. The archive continues to expand, so much in fact that we are raising funds to expand the Cary Collection in order to house, basically in order to create more archival space to house these growing collections. The GDA supports all areas of design education at RIT. And what makes the collection so very special is that it shows not only the final projects of influential graphic designers, it shows the artist's work and process. For example, this is a slide of our GDA website. And here you can explore each of the designers whom we have their archives. But here is an example. This is Lester Beale's, we'll take for example Lester Beale's famous posters for the Rural Electrification Administration in the 1930s. Here we see some of the sketches that Beale made while in the earliest stages of the project. You can see that someone has circled the faucet And indeed, that sketch was actualized as a poster. Or we can see how Beale transformed this black and white photo into this colorful poster. Here's an example that might be familiar. It's William Golding's branding work for CBS, the famous CBS eye. And we have some of Golding's work in our archives. The Graphic Design Archive is a singular collection in that it houses the archives of many women designers of that period. C.P. Pinellas, for example, worked as a graphic designer for Charm and other fashion magazines, and here is one of her covers. There's so much to show you from the Cary Collection, but I thought I might have a little fun and show you some of the most requested items in our library. Miniature books are a quirky interest of many book collectors. There's something about these little tomes that's so attractive to people. This image, taken from our Edges of Books exhibition catalog, shows a variety of miniature books chosen for their edge decoration. I can see a mini Shakespeare there, and the book that the young woman's holding is actually a Finger New Testament. It's open to Acts. Our smallest book measures 5 millimeters by 5 millimeters. It's the Lord's Prayer, printed with metal type, if you can believe it, and it's printed in 12 different languages. It was printed in Amsterdam in 1952. And here is a close-up of it in the palm of my hand. I have to be honest with you, I'm always afraid to get this book out. I always fear if I dropped it and it rolled under somewhere, I might not be able to find it. It might get vacuumed up. Many of our visitors also want to see examples of four-edge paintings. The term four-edge painting can mean any painting applied to the foredge or the paper edge of a book. But foredge painting as a term has become more synonymous with a style of foredge painting in which the painting is hidden under a layer of gold leaf and is revealed only when the pages of the book are fanned. Revealing the painting can be quite surprising. So, for example, here is a clip of me fanning an 1848 edition of John Evelyn's The Wife of Mrs. Godolphin. Under the gilt edge hides a foredge painting of Windsor Castle. The Cary Collection has over 100 examples of foredge paintings. One of my favorites is this edition of Shakespeare's poems, which has a painting of the house on Henley Street in Stratford-upon-Avon, where Shakespeare was born in 1564. Another foredge painting that I quite like is found in a volume devoted to railway engineers George Stephenson and his son Robert. The book features a painting of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway at Newton, the construction of which is described in the book. And I'm particularly fond of how colorful this painting has remained. Any librarian or curator who has shown foredge paintings to those unfamiliar with the artistic genre can attest to the amazement and delight that the unexpected appearance of a painting can bring. Hidden foredge paintings never fail to charm visitors to the Cary Collection. Now that I hope you have a sense of our collections, let me briefly look at how they are used. Last year, we hosted approximately 600 researchers and visitors. Some were conducting research for academic papers, some were designers or bookmakers seeking inspiration from our items in our collection. Some users, like the ones shown in this slide, are type designers who design modern typefaces or fonts for companies like Adobe and Monotype. Indeed, type designers sometimes create digital fonts of historical typefaces found in our collections. Lately, we have had increased interest from scholars from all over the world who want to use our collection for their work. In response, we are in the process of raising money to create research fellowships so that scholars can come to the Cary Collection and use our materials in person. We are also increasing the digitization of our artifacts so that people can use our materials from a distance. Students are the primary users of the Cary Collection. Here you can see curator Amelia Fontenelle teaching a graphic design class. And here am I, teaching a class in medieval manuscripts and early printing. Look how large that music manuscript is in your lower left. That's a 15th century antiphonal leaf. Can you imagine when that was actually in the book it came from, how amazingly large that book would have been? Clearly that was meant for many people to sing from at once, rather than a single user. Although we teach mostly to students studying graphic design and printing, we have been successfully reaching out to other academic departments on campus. Last year we hosted class sessions for fields such as literature, journalism, German language, photography, and history. Last year, 72 classes of a total of 1,200 students visited the Cary Collection, which is just wonderful. In addition to hosting classes in the Cary Collection, I also teach a course called Tablet to Tablet, A History of Books. The course examines the history of books from 2300 BCE to the present. Taking an archaeological approach, students study books as physical artifacts that carry with them important evidence of the cultures that produced and read them. We use the Cary Graphic Arts Collection as our research laboratory, investigating the history of the books through hands-on interactions with artifacts both ancient and modern, while also pondering what forms future books might take. Pictured here is a student creating a cuneiform clay tablet. And as we study each communication or writing medium, we create it as well. So we also, in addition to clay tablets, we also do calligraphy. And in this image, we have a student studying type in our press room. We also host programs in the Cary Collection and participate in campus events. Here's a picture taken from one of our De-Stress with Letterpress events. Basically, in and around finals time, we open the Cary up for students, faculty, and staff to come in and to get a little bit of their stress out, de-stress at Letterpress, with about 3 or 4 printing projects that we have ready for them. We also take our smaller presses to events across campus. Pardon me. Pictured here are students printing note cards at an event called the Typographic Carousel. I have to apologize, I'm getting over a cold, so my throat's going a little bit. Pardon me. We also host lectures on a variety of topics. Here is Professor Emeritus Dane Gordon talking on the King James Bible in support of our exhibition last fall. I should add that our events are open to the public, and I hope that some of you that are watching will consider attending in the years to come. One of the best ways to keep up with us and our various programs is to follow our homepage or go to Facebook and like us there. If you want to be added to our mailing list, please send me an email to the address shown here. And here's the contact information again. This brings me to the end of my presentation, and probably just in time, as my throat's getting froggy. I do apologize. I want to thank you all sincerely for joining us on this tour. And again, I hope this is a tour that you decide to take in person. Should you ever want to come to the Cary Collection and have a look at any of the material that you saw here in the presentation, please contact me to make an appointment. Thank you for your time.
Steve, thank you. That's a fascinating tour. We appreciate you sharing some of the treasures of the collection with us. As a reminder, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat box, and we will get those to Steve. We actually have a couple that have already come in, Steve. Our first question comes from Corey. The question is, how do you solicit and obtain new items for the collection, and what criteria do you use?
Well, that's a very good question, Corey. It comes in a variety of ways. One of my jobs as curator is to follow sales of books and other artifacts. And I do that through booksellers' catalogs, but also auction catalogs. In terms of, the criteria, we collect in the areas that I listed earlier and other areas. So we look out for objects that will help us, augment our teaching collections or allow us to augment our research collections. In both, we always keep, we keep in mind our local faculty and their research interests. For instance, in the School of Design, they've been very interested in avant-garde typography from the 1920s and 30s, the kind of design that's going to eventually influence the designers that are present in the Graphic Design Archive. So in reaction to that research interest on campus, we've begun to add to our collection of avant-garde design and typography. So, I always think that special collections should continue to reflect the interests and the personality of the campus that it serves. Really first and foremost, and then after the scholars from off campus, and in our case, really around the world.
Thanks, Steve. Corey actually has another question. The question is, I'm intrigued by the painted edge books. Other than fanning them, is there another easy way to identify books that are decorated this way?
Unfortunately not. Now, before there were hidden foredge paintings, and again, that's maybe a late 19th century, early 20th century phenomenon. There are simply foredge paintings that aren't hidden. People would just paint on the sides, and that goes back at least, the earliest ones that come to mind right now are from the mid-16th century, but, you could see, in terms of figures or things, in terms of painting on designs, it goes much further back. Sometimes, when they're hidden, you can still kind of see, when you look at the edge, you can kind of see something beneath that gold. Sometimes, to be honest, it's just like a slab of gold, and you can't see the painting. But every now and then you get these sort of shadowy images underneath it, indicating that there might be something under there. But you really can never be sure until you fan the pages. So now I'm afraid that all the listeners are going to be going to secondhand bookshops and fanning every book they see in gold. Which, that would be wonderful.
That would be wonderful, Steve. We're going to do that this afternoon.
That's right.
Question came in from John. The question is, are there photography books in the Cary Collection? And if not, where do they reside at RIT?
There are photography books in the Cary Collection. It hasn't been one of our major focuses of collection development. That has something to do with the Eastman House being in town. And, sometimes we do think broadly if a researcher's in Rochester and they're going to use all of the institutions, who's collecting what. But that said, we do have examples of photography, some early. We have a lot of great examples of photography in our artist book collection, both found in Cary, but I think you're going to find the most photography at RIT probably in the RIT archives. And that's, again, in the Wallace Center on the 3rd floor. But if you are in the building and you want to see some examples of photography, definitely come to the Cary Collection, and then probably also the RIT archives. Okay.
I just wanted to share this with everyone that Corey sent a follow-up comment. I will be on the painted edge books. The statement is I will be doing just that, painting old gilded edge books.
That's great. And I should say, Corey, there's actually a few artists who still do that for a living. If you look up Martin Frost, just Google his name. You can go to his site. He still takes commissions and does his own artwork. He's a forage painter. And indeed, when we had our exhibition in the fall of 2012 on the Edges of Books, he came and did a workshop and a lecture. And so we had about a half dozen people creating forage paintings in the library, which was quite wonderful.
Now, on a slightly different topic, what is the most unique printed substrate you have in the collection, Steve?
Oh, that's a very good question.
This comes from Nicole.
That's a great question, Nicole. The one that comes to mind And it's a special book that we have. It was printed in 1801 by a man named Matthias Koops, with a K, K-O-O-P-S. And he prints a whole book on hay. And he's making the case in the book that hay would be a great substrate because it's so available. He's in England. It would be a cheap way of making paper. Of course, the paper is very yellow, and I'm not sure that ever caught on. But the very interesting thing about that book is about 80% of it is printed on hay, and then at the end he has an appendix where he talks about the use of wood pulp as a substrate for paper. And he prints it on wood pulp paper. And we believe that that's the earliest use of wood pulp paper in a monograph or a book in 1801 by Matthias Koops in our collection. So hay was the first thing that came to mind. Nothing. I'm sure we have some things that are more unusual, but they're not coming to me. If something pops in, though, Nicole, I'll jump back in with that with an answer.
Okay. I'm just going to share a bit of a comment we got from David. David says, thanks for the tour, and he's just finished cataloging the Robert Brent's collection. David, I just want to let you know that I'm going to pass that additional information along to Steve at the conclusion of this webinar, but thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the audience? I know, Steve, you mentioned a fall exhibition, but I think you've got something coming up this spring that you might want to let our alums know about.
Yeah, yes, please. Well, currently there is an exhibition on. We're having two exhibitions, one in the spring, and then one will begin in late spring and go into the summer. But the one that's currently up is an exhibition on poetry broadsides. So it's print as poetry, poetry as print. So you want to see some beautiful poems printed in beautiful ways. And that's been a fun exhibition, actually, because it gave us the opportunity to have poetry readings and other programming in the Cary. But starting in May, we're going to have an exhibition on the graphic designer, Elaine Lustig Cohen. We have her archive. It's a part of the graphic design archive. And if you're interested in mid-century modernist design or graphic design, this is going to be just a wonderful example of that and a wonderful example of the kind of archives that we're fortunate enough to house in our graphic design archive.
Fantastic. All right. There are no other questions that have come in, but if you all think of something you want to ask or comment on, please feel free to reach out to Steve directly, or you can email us at the email address is ritalum@rit.edu, which is on the screen, or you can tweet your questions to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we will forward your questions directly to Steve so he can respond.